Happy New Year. I am so happy to see you, and I hope that your new year is off to a good start. I wanted to hop on today and talk a little bit about New Year's resolution troubleshooting. Because even though we're only a couple days into the new year, I'm already being bombarded with people making posts or comments or whatever about how their New Year's resolution only lasted till breakfast or one day or whatever. This feeling that we're not able to keep up with our resolution or succeed with our resolution is a big part of the reason why a lot of us just stopped making New Year's resolutions in the first place. Because it just kind of makes you feel meh, and you end up kind of sort of feeling more like a failure. So, that is the antithesis of our goal with setting New Year's resolutions. So, I wanted to talk a little bit today about how we can set ourselves up for success with a resolution we can keep and with a resolution that we feel we're succeeding at consistently. And then that's what gives us the motivation to keep pushing through, even when life is lifing and life is feeling a little bit of a challenge. That's when we kind of need that little boost, that little push to help us keep, you know, uh, up with our resolution, so to speak. So, a lot of people set a resolution like eating healthier. So, this is something where as you get busier and life gets more stressful and you have a lot more things going on, it becomes more challenging to keep with that resolution. And a lot of times we feel like we've fallen off of the wagon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. But thank you all for being here. So, hello to Jules, Jackie, and ASMR Panda. Happy New Year, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I am also happy to answer any questions that you guys have. But since this is kind of a little bit of a spur of the moment live, I've kind of prepared some stuff that I want to talk about. So questions are welcome, but don't feel pressured to leave questions if you're like, I was just coming here to say hello. Anyways, no pressure on you either way. But okay, so one of the first things that I think comes up, I know for me, and certainly over the years that I've kind of struggled with setting resolutions and keeping resolutions, one of the biggest things that comes up is actually the self judgment we end up placing on ourselves. So for me, that looks like a feeling that I wasn't able to make the healthiest choice or wasn't able to do the thing I wanted. So, I made a goal like doing yoga every day. And then when life was lifing and I didn't make time for it or I didn't have time for it, I ended up feeling worse about myself. And then I was like, well, of course I couldn't keep up with my resolution. I can never keep up with things like this. And you don't notice the self judgment. That's why it's so creepy and insidious. A lot of times we are constantly passing these little self judgments or big self judgments on ourselves all throughout the day. And a lot of times we don't notice them. But once you start noticing all your self judgments coming up and how often they come up, and you start becoming aware of like, wow, I'm like really hard on myself. I think that big, the big underlying reason that it's actually our ego that is trying to protect itself via the inner critic, via the self judgment, or via, if you prefer the pronunciation. So essentially, the ego wants to protect itself from potentially being bad at something, right? Because every time you're trying something new, you're going to change your diet, you're going to start maybe learning a new skill or doing a sport, learning how to play music, learning how to do a language. You've decided to go back to school. Anytime we're in this position where we're confronting learning things and trying to get good at something, especially physical activities, things that involve not only the mental component, but also like coordination. That's really challenging. And it really puts our ego in a sensitive spot where the ego's like, hey, you learning new things is really bad for me. So, in an effort to sabotage us from ever taking that first step to learn that new thing, it sends your inner critic out. You could say the inner critic has like a Nerf bazooka gun, those little like giant Nerf things, but I mean those things can hurt. They're big. But anyhow, your inner critic comes out with that giant Nerf pew pew. I realized I can get in trouble for saying that, even talking about a Nerf pew pew. Anyway, YouTube these days. So the inner critic comes out in full force to try and stop you from ever taking that first step in learning the new thing. And a lot of times it succeeds, right? And so it's through these self judgments that we often self sabotage. So once you start increasing your awareness of those self judgments, which means noticing them, increasing awareness, big word for noticing them. Oh, Lauren, hello. Good to see you. How is your day going? So the inner critic's coming out in full force to stop you. The ego's trying to protect itself. These self-judgments that are spewing forth from the inner critic uh, end up sabotaging us because it's the thoughts like, I can never get anything done. I never succeed with any of these tasks. Maybe in a physical way, I'm not strong enough. I'm not coordinated enough. I'm in such bad shape. How often do we think to ourselves, oh, I got to get in better shape? I'm in bad shape. This is a very, uh, it's a thought that we have all the time, but it's really lacking any kind of concrete, you know, guide or guideline, you could say. Like, what are we stacking ourselves up against? The best shape that we could be in? Because to compare ourselves to someone who's maybe been an Olympic athlete since they were really young, well, that's not really fair to compare ourselves to that, right? So, but it's difficult for us to think about comparing ourselves to the best version of ourselves or the what is our greatest potential of a thing we could achieve right now. But instead we have these kind of, lacking uh thoughts about ourselves. Like I'm in such bad shape or I'm not in good enough shape to do XYZ. So, noticing how your self-judgments lead to self-sabotage and having grace for yourself for having those judgments. Because this tip or whatever this is, this little spiel I'm going on, is not about making you judge yourself more for having judgments about yourself. It's about accepting those judgments. It's accepting that having those judgments on yourselves is completely human. And in a weird way, those self judgments are trying to protect us. Those self judgments come from a place where our ego is actually trying to protect itself. But unfortunately, the route that is being taken ends up keeping us in our comfort zone. That's why it's comfortable. Because getting out of our comfort zone means we have to confront these things that maybe we're not really good at yet. And we have to confront all of this self judgment that's going to spew forth from our inner critic and ego once we start trying to come out of the comfort zone and do something new. So, whatever resolution you have set, get more sleep. That's one that I saw somebody saying. Eat healthier. A lot of people set that goal. So I'm gonna do a whole little I have a whole little spiel plan for that for that goal. Eating healthier, getting in shape. There's another one. It's kind of this vague thing, but it's a goal, right? And it's good to have a goal set for yourself. But we're going to talk about how we can kind of set these resolutions up for more success. Now, one thing that is also very real about any of these goals is that it can be really overwhelming when you actually are like start going about the thing. So let's take eating healthier. It can be really overwhelming when you start learning different nutrition information, partly because there's so much different nutrition information out there. A lot of times it seems to be really conflicting. You'll hear that a certain food is really healthy for you, and then you'll hear somebody else say that food is really bad for you and no one should be eating it. There's a lot of very, passionate people because when people find something that works for them nutritionally or lifestyle wise, they want to sing it from the rooftops. They want to share that with as many people as possible. And I don't think that it's ever a bad thing for someone to share what worked for them. And obviously, people sharing what worked for them is like one of the best ways we can all help each other out. But you also have to recognize that just because something worked for one person doesn't mean that everyone else is going to have that same replicable effect or that that same result can be replicated for you. And that's like the small print every time you buy any kind of, diet product or something like that, right? The results are not typical. And that's just one, I guess, grain of salt, right? Isn't that what they see everything with a take it with a grain of salt? So one of the grains of salt is that every person's body is different. We have different bodies in the first place, right? Different physiology, but we also have different conditions that our body may be in. So someone with um, a different condition that they're in or a different root problem for what they're experiencing can have a really drastically different result, even if they're doing the same thing that other person did. So that's the first grain of salt. Everyone's body is different and we respond differently to things. The second one is that there has definitely become a huge industry surrounding healthy foods, weight loss, etc. Like you can look up weight loss industry and there's tons of products being sold, books being written, and a lot of the different, I guess, financial motivations you could say um, for a lot of these products end up making it so that those people are a bit sensational, you could say. And obviously, a varying amount of sensational for every different product out there. But just knowing that, like, oh, people are really sensationalizing this, or people really go on and on and on about how this is the answer and this is the diet or this is the product. I mean, it's because there's a huge financial motivation behind them to do that. So, as you're going through all of this information and you're feeling that sense of overwhelm, number one, I mean, yeah, because it is overwhelming. Okay. I'm not trying to say that it's not, but I think that a good way of kind of approaching that and maybe having hopefully a bit more success with not getting so overwhelmed is that you kind of keep these things in mind. And as you're looking at different information, just let go of that sense of overwhelm. Recognize that the more you know is beneficial for you, and that some of those people out there want to overwhelm you. They want you to feel overwhelmed so that you'll be more likely to purchase XYZ, or so that you'll be more likely to kind of hold up this certain person on a pedestal like their information is the end all be all. But the real fact about information is that no one owns it, no one made it up. And when it comes to actually taking care of our health, even that is not really a patentable product. So, within itself, this idea of a weight loss industry is contingent upon you thinking that the concept of weight loss is really, really overwhelming. And you're going to end up needing to spend a lot of money to get the answer to this thing, which is totally confounding, confusing, and impossible for any normal person to just understand. Do you see how, like, feeling that way about it and feeling overwhelmed actually just contributes to their end goal altogether? So, what I present to you instead is that the answer is ridiculously simple. All of the overwhelm that we feel about it is part of what is preventing us from actually getting healthier or actually feeling better or actually losing weight if that is the goal. So, releasing the overwhelm and taking this perspective that the solution is actually really simple. So, for one instance, um, while we're kind of talking about weight loss here, um, and that's a big one that I see a lot of people's frustration around, right? Understandably so. When we're looking at a lot of the foods that are out there, I have lovingly called them frankenfoods in the past, right? Highly processed, lots of ingredients, lots of different chemicals that help them produce the food very cheaply. Well, a lot of these foods are literally designed to make people overeat. They're designed by food scientists, and some of these food scientists have gone on to write books about the different techniques they use to make the foods literally addictive, to make the foods so that they trick your brain into not realizing how much you've eaten, trick your body and your brain into not realizing how much food you've eaten. This, I believe, is the quintessential reason that we all struggle so much with weight loss because we're all eating these foods that are designed to make you overeat and to trick your body into overeating. I mean, that's ridiculously simple. It's ridiculously simple. So, this perspective, though, you can start understanding why I always talk about eat real foods. Eat real foods. What does that mean? Eating foods that are just closer to their natural state. When you turn over the product and there's this really crazy long ingredient list and tons of crazy chemicals you can't pronounce, that's a frankenfood. That's one of these highly processed foods that are typically designed to make you overeat. So let's take a great example, Cheetos. And I'm someone who loves Cheetos, get me not wrong. But I won't eat them anymore because I'm like, oh man, that's freaking pretty crummy thing. But thankfully, there's lots of, you know, healthier cheese poof products, and I do eat a lot of those. But Cheetos are one of these foods which is designed with what they call vanishing caloric density. And I apologize to anyone who's like, oh God, she's talking about the vanishing caloric density again. Somebody frickin' anyways, because I've talked about this a lot. But it's something that I think is such a weird term, okay, number 1. But it's also something like if we think more with this concept, we can understand why some foods fill you up, they satiate you, they make it so that you don't have to think about food anymore for like several hours. And some foods make it so that you sit there, you eat an absurd amount of that food, such as an entire giant, family size bag, and then you actually still feel hungry. What weird juju is this? Well, part of that is this vanishing caloric density. So, what that means is that they design the food so that it kind of disappears into your mouth, right? Oftentimes, they do like when there's a big crunch. They want you to get a lot of sensation from it. I believe there's a name for that as well. But you have this big crunch, a lot of sensation, a lot of flavor, but then the food dissipates in your mouth very, very quickly. I can think of a lot of foods that kind of meet that, uh, meet that mark. So the caloric density of the food, or like your body understanding how much food you just ate, okay, caloric density vanishes. And the whole point of the vanishing caloric density is that the food tricks your body and your brain into not realizing how much you've eaten. And that's why it's so easy to overeat those types of foods. So instead, if you like cheese, okay, if you're like, oh, I love Cheetos, okay, well, you like cheese. So eat actual cheese. I know it's kind of a crazy thought. Eat actual cheese. And then there's this product, I think it's called cheese wisps, but it's just puffed cheese and it's crispy, just like a Cheeto, but literally the ingredient is like cheese. So this is just one example of eating real foods as opposed to the ingredients of Cheetos, which like would probably take me an hour to go through all of them and explaining what they all are. Which at some point I'm gonna do. I'm trying to think of the best way to, because there's so many food chemicals. Inconceivable number of food chemicals. So, even when I did that, "What the heck is in a Big Mac" video, that video was so long. Just trying to, like, go through each ingredient and give, like, a little explanation of what each one was, like, I was blown away. I knew this is a highly processed food. McDonald's is junk food, right? We all think of, this concept of junk food. But like even I didn't really realize like how terrible it was. And then once I started going down the rabbit hole of learning about those ingredients and being completely overwhelmed, to bring me back to my first tip, it's overwhelming when you start learning about ingredients, and especially if there's certain ingredients that you're going to read every food label and try to avoid. That is overwhelming. And there's a lot of people doing that, right? Who have a certain food allergy or sensitivity. They're like, "Oh, I can't eat XYZ." So they actually have to stand there and read all of the labels to make sure they're not in there. When I was beginning to learn about all the different food chemicals, I was also kind of like, "Oh, I'm gonna keep track of, these couple and try to avoid them." What I realized is that those ingredients were in so many different foods. It was, like, impossible to keep track of which ones had, "Okay, well, this one has these 5 ingredients I don't like, this one has these 5 okay, this one has this," and I just started seeing these ingredients over and over and over again, and started getting the idea that, like, oh, well, these food manufacturers are basically just making the frankenfoods out of, like, a bunch of cheap crud ingredients that they use in tons and tons and tons and tons of different foods. Um, there's also this, like, modified cornstarch, maltodextrin, are a lot of different, chemical ingredients that are sourced from just one food. But I'm like, "Man, how much better, how much healthier would this food be if they just put actual corn in it?" Like, stop turning the corn into a bazillion different other random chemicals and just put the corn in the food. Because here's another little thing about eating real foods, because they contain all these different nutrients, they typically contain a ratio of macronutrients, so your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Obviously, different foods have different ratios of those things. But for the most part, when you're eating real foods, you're getting a lot of those, all those different components. And those components in your food are part of what send that message of satiation or your hunger being satisfied that helps you stop eating and makes it so you like kind of get full and you just stop thinking about food. Like that's the goal, right? And unfortunately, that's where so many of us struggle because it's this constant thing where you're constantly thinking about food, and because you're never actually satisfying your hunger, your relationship with food becomes very um uncomfortable. So perhaps that's another kind of grain of salt or whatever with this, that you want to have a good relationship with food. You want to feel excited about food. You want to feel that you're nourishing your body and you're focusing on nourishment over deprivation. What is bad about maltodextrin? So maltodextrin is just one of many, many kind of like filler. I think it's maybe like a filler preservative. I honestly got to where I stopped keeping track of what all of the different food chemicals do, like emulsifier, preservative, like they're all a million different things. But the bottom line ends up being number one, maltodextrin is a corn based product. Most of the corn that they use for these different modified cornstarch, maltodextrin, corn syrup solids, that's another one you see all the time. So you see high fructose corn syrup and corn syrup solids a lot of times in the ingredients. And the list really goes on. I don't know the whole list, but there's a big list of all these things that come from the corn. Unfortunately, the corn is one of our top genetically modified crops. So even though we don't label things if they're genetically modified, right? In this country, we only label things if they are non GMO. So if you're eating something with organic corn in it will typically have the little non GMO verified label on it and that good stuff. But anytime there's a non organic corn in an ingredient list or one of these corn-based products in the ingredient list, it's probably made from this GMO corn. And the GMO corn that they use to make these food chemicals with is different from the like sweet corn that you find in like your Campbell's soup or whatever type of food that has like actual corn kernels in it. So it is two different types of corn, but the dent corn that they use to make the food chemicals is mostly the genetically modified corn. So that's one of the considerations. And then the main thing for me, because a lot of people, and I was one of these people when when I was at the beginning of this journey too. We get kind of hung up on like, oh, what's so bad about XYZ chemical, right? Maltodextrin, monosodium glutamate, high fructose corn syrup. What's so bad about corn syrup solids? The number one problem with all of these food chemicals is literally just that they're not a real food. They were a real food, but then they go through all of this different processing so that now they no longer contain the original macronutrient ratio of the original food. So, in the case of corn syrup solids and high fructose corn syrup, they're just extracting out the sweet part of the corn. So, when you eat a bowl of sweet corn, you're getting all of these other nutrients, you're getting all of this fiber, you're getting all of these other things. But once you start extracting one part of the food out and concentrating it really highly, and there's a certain other thing that I often use as an example of this idea of like taking something that grows in the ground and then highly concentrating it. So now it does something totally different to the person who ingests that thing. So part of it is that you're isolating out part of the real food and concentrating that part of the food. And when this processing is occurring, that's all happening on highly uh, big and technical equipment, right? You can kind of imagine these like huge factories where they're, if you ever watch those how it's made videos, that's kind of a cool, way that you kind of like see into how big these factories are, how big everything's going through it. So when the food is going through all of these different machines, it does get a certain amount of heavy metal contamination. So when we hear about certain foods having heavy metal contamination, oh, a lot of arsenic was found in this food. Oh, a lot of whatever. There's been a lot of different instances, and there was something recently that came out. Um, Protein powders. were tested by, um, what is that? Consumer Reports, I believe, did a thing with like hundreds of different protein powders and then went through like how many of them had these different heavy metal contamination levels that were over what's considered toxic. And it was quite a lot. And then I think they've done it with a lot of other products too. So a lot of that heavy metal contamination comes simply from the foods being highly processed in in this big machinery, etc. All right, hello to professional paranormal research. How are you doing? How was everybody's new year? It is definitely always kind of sneaks up on you in a way. And certainly the Christmas season just comes and goes so quickly. What do you think about citric acid, potassium sorbate, and sodium benzoate? Jules, thank you so much for the question. So, yeah, all of those. So, specifically, the sodium benzoate, I would say, is probably the one that I've seen the most research that has come out about um, potential negative health effects when people are consuming a lot of it. And then the thing about it is, it's in almost everything. And when you start reading ingredients, like you start getting really overwhelmed. That's why I started this chat talking about overwhelm, because like it is overwhelming when you start looking at all the ingredient list and you're so sodium benzoate is in a lot of our skincare topical products. It's also in a lot of our foods. When these chemicals are being used in countless different products, it becomes very difficult for anyone, in the realm of, science and research to actually determine like how much any one person is coming into contact with in a day. If so I think they say like females use an average of, let's just say, 17 different skincare products throughout the day. So your body wash, your lotion, your primer, your makeup, your nail polish, whatever, right? Well, let's say 15 of those products all contain sodium benzoate. Let's say that in a day, that person eats 42 different foods and 36 of them contain sodium benzoate. The idea of, you know, um, figuring out how much of that chemical that person is consuming in a day is kind of crazy impossible. So I think that's the biggest thing for all of these chemicals that are so rampant and so overused, that even though some of the research is not super strong in terms of what the dangerous effects are, partly because they've not been around long enough to see the long-term effects, partly because there's no one to fund those studies. There's not a huge, tremendous amount of money behind discovering the dangers of these different food chemicals. So we have Consumer Reports, we have Center for Food Safety. We do have a couple of groups that are funding this research to, look at our different contamination levels from different things. But there's way more money being spent on coming up with these chemicals and putting these chemicals into more things as possible than there is money going into research to actually see if those things are safe. So now we have hundreds and hundreds of different food chemicals. You used to be like, oh, here's the food chemicals, and then here's the like skincare, topical product list. But now there's a lot of crisscross on them, which is interesting in and of itself, right? Um, the citric acid. A lot of the issues around citric acid have been around the way that it is produced. So when you see citric acid on a food label, like they could just isolate the citric acid out of an orange, or they could just put a little bit of orange into that food and largely it would have, a similar effect. But when you just see the word citric acid on the label, you have no way of knowing what they made it out of, what they made it from, what process it went through when they were making it. And then you take that with all of these different chemicals. Um, it's honestly so overwhelming to me to keep track of all the different chemicals and keep like, I used to have kind of a encyclopedia in my mind of, like, all the different chemicals. Oh, this one for that, this one for that, da, 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 da. I've kind of over the years, so that was me, like, 10 years ago. Over the years, I've kind of realized, like, oh, keeping track of all of these chemicals is kind of a faff, which means a waste of time. And I don't necessarily mean that it's a waste of time to learn about them, but to keep a certain part of your mind just filled with all of this information about all of these different food chemicals, like, it's sort of pointless. What I ended up realizing is that there's so many of these different chemicals with so little research on their safety slash way of the industry even knowing how much people are actually ingesting every day because it's in so many different products, that rather than trying to focus on avoiding these certain chemicals and reading all these crazy ingredient lists. And I used to spend 4 hours in the grocery store reading every ingredient list. That's how it started for me. And then I just started being like, "Oh, anything with a big long ingredient list is gonna have at least 1, if not 10 of these weird chemicals that are on my list of chemicals to avoid." So then just for the sake of simplicity and my own, hopefully, mental, uh health, I guess, I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna try to eat foods that don't have a super long ingredient list. I'm just gonna try to eat real foods." So, from the produce department, or if you go to the deli and you're in the meat department, none of those meats have ingredients, save for, like, sausage type of things, which you could get from the deli, will often wouldn't have an ingredient list. But if you're trying to just optimize the number of foods you're eating that are just real foods with no ingredient list, a can of corn, a bag of peas, some rice, um, some chicken, some pork belly, which holy camole, it's insane. But remember too that when you're eating these foods that are incredibly satisfying, part of the reason they're so satisfying is that it's your body's way of telling you, like, "Oh my god, the nutrients in this food are amazing." So then what they've done with the processed food, the monosodium glutamate, the really high levels of sugar, and this highly concentrated sugar that they've created, the high fructose corn syrup, which is not replicable in nature. There is nothing as sweet as high fructose corn syrup in nature. They've kind of tricked our brain and our uh, mechanisms within our taste, within our digestive tract, that send the signals to the brain like, "Hey, you're full. Hey, stop eating." They've messed with all that. So now we're eating these foods that our brains can't tell when we should stop eating. We're eating foods that never actually satisfy us. We've had all of the real foods demonized by the mainstream approach to health, right? Stay away from the fats. Well, you know what they ended up finding out? They've been demonizing the saturated and unsaturated fats and da 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 and all this stuff. Well, the partially hydrogenated oils, aka trans fats, the margarine, okay, but also Crisco. But also, if you look for partially hydrogenated oils, again, you're going to see them everywhere. They ended up finding out that those trans fats or partially hydrogenated oils are far worse for your health than any of the natural fats that they went out of their way to demonize. Don't eat butter, don't eat too much beef, all of the, don't eat too many eggs. All of these different perspectives that have been put out there to discourage us from eating real foods are largely there because someone's going to make a lot of money when you end up unable to control your eating, unable to control how much you eat, unable to satisfy your hunger, right? It's like they're making the money when they sell you the processed junk foods, then somebody's else making a bunch of money when you can't lose weight because you're eating a bunch of processed junk foods that are designed to make you overeat. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nut or whatever, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I'm looking around and I'm seeing all of these people that are struggling and feeling like it's so overwhelming and so difficult to figure out what to do. And it makes me sad. And I've been there. And I've been overwhelmed with health information. And I've been overwhelmed with trying different diets or whatever. And it sucks. And it makes you feel like crud about yourself, which is a totally other different thing I didn't even get into, which is that a lot of us are setting goals that are based from a place of self-judgment. Perhaps, perhaps the next topic. Okay, we have a question here. Jules, can your hunger signals be wrong? For example, feeling hungry when your body doesn't actually need food. And how do you know the difference? Yeah, let me think about how I want to answer that. So the first question, can your hunger signals be wrong? I mean, number 1, I would say that if you still have processed foods, and especially the junk foods or fast foods, which it's so sad, it's very unfortunate that the foods that are the most readily available, the easiest to get to in a rush, are like the absolute worst foods for you. I have a problem with that, and that has nothing to do with the consumer, that has everything to do with, people much bigger than us. But if you're still eating those foods, then yes, your hunger signals are probably very, very confused. Um, Even just the presence of the high fructose corn syrup, um, I believe confuses your body so much that it's gonna make all of your different hunger cues and cravings, potentially, misleading, right? Or, not actually reflecting what your body needs. Um, for the perspective that, um, maybe you are eating healthy, so to speak, you are eating real when I feel silly saying real foods, I feel silly putting it in quotation marks. I don't know what else to do, like, all the foods in the grocery store are processed frankenfoods. Like, I feel I'm, like, challenged to actually help people understand and qualify, like, what is a real food? What does that mean? But anyways, so I feel silly in that regard. But if you are eating real foods, at least for the most part, right? You don't have to do everything all the time, but let's say 70% of the time, eating real foods. I think there can still be a lot of confusion that might be happening with our hunger signals. And a lot of times, we can have very specific nutritional deficiencies that may actually be causing a craving for one thing when the body's needing something else, or just kind of sending us maybe hunger cues when we're not hungry. We hear a lot about sometimes when you're hungry, you're really just thirsty, you're really just dehydrated. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes you can drink some water and you actually will feel like, oh, okay, that helped. A lot of times, excuse me, um, a lot of times though, our hunger is our body's way of asking for a very specific nutrient. And I do think that when we're getting very strong cravings, it is worth paying attention to what that craving is and what your body might be trying to ask for. So, one of the common ones is salty cravings, often means there's a mineral deficiency. So, then there's these different like trace mineral things. There's like one that's a liquid you can take. But your body's favorite way to take in nutrients is from foods. So that's why we hear this recommendation of having a diet with a lot of variety, eating foods of a lot of different colors. It's just one way of helping your body get, all of these different nutrients, macro, which is protein, carbohydrates, and fat, but also the micronutrients, which I think are one of the biggest impetus for different cravings that we're having. So we're actually missing out on important minerals. Selenium is one that I hear a lot of times that's associated with different, very specific effects. Um, so, one thing that people can do is look up your symptoms and then, like, what nutritional deficiency is associated with those symptoms. It doesn't mean that's going to be an end all be all correct. But if you're looking at the list of foods that are recommended for that nutritional deficiency and those foods sound really, really appealing to you, I would say that's your body's way of telling you, like, oh, yeah, go get some pickles or go get some sauerkraut or go get some beets or whatever it is that's on the list that's really appealing. Similarly, you can uh, do a nutritional deficiency test either by sending your blood work off. There's ones that you can actually order to like delivered to your home and then you just send them a little blood sample and you can see any dietary allergies or deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies you might have and then go look up a list of, what are the best food sources of selenium or magnesium or whatever it is that comes up in that um, test results that you've done. Let's see. Okay, feeling hungry when your body doesn't actually need food. How do you know the difference? One of the things that I do, I don't, this is not very scientific or anything, but if I'm like, oh man, I'm kind of hungry, I kind of want to make a pizza or something, I'll be like, okay, Karina, how appealing does it sound right now to eat a salad? And if you're actually hungry, you'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna make a salad and I'm gonna throw in" so my salad trick is I'll, get some, like, trail mix and then just, like, dump the trail mix in the salad. So there's, like, a little bit of, like, maybe dried fruit, there's a little bit of nuts for a little crunchiness, maybe there's little pumpkin seed, pepita things or whatever. But getting trail mix, dumping that so because having it's what makes a salad good is all the stuff you put in it, right? So, a little bit of trail mix, maybe like some cheese. If you have some like yummy cheese and you throw that in the salad, if that sounds good, then you're actually hungry. If that sounds like, "Bleh, I want a pizza," then that's probably an emotional feeling rather than like actual legitimate hunger. I'm trying to think of a little bit more fancy answer for you though. Um, I mean, the main thing with food is I think of like when was the last time I ate? If you had a big meal less than 3 hours ago and you're feeling hungry, you're probably not really hungry. But then there's also this thing where we can eat a huge meal and leave our body actually still deficient in some really important nutrient. So maybe that's another thing that you think about. Like, okay, I just ate, but it was just a huge plate of carbs, like a huge plate of pasta. Maybe I need a bit more protein, um, or healthy fats. This is another one that can be a little bit difficult, but a lot of times we're eating meals that are really high in fat, but they're not giving us the like healthy dietary fat that our body actually like needs and uses. So that's one thing to think about, like, oh, or maybe you just had a huge steak, or maybe what you did is you had a huge steak, excuse me, and you had um some veggies or salad or something, but you actually were doing a low carb meal and you didn't have any carbohydrates. And then you feel hungry shortly after. Well, it's partly because you were depriving yourself of the carbs. So it's all about finding happy balances. A lot of times for my carb portion of my meal, I'm making steamed corn or creamy corn, or there's some kind of carbohydrate represented, either sweet potatoes or beets, right? Which would be like a carb representation, which won't always do the trick. But a lot of times for me, if I have like roasted root vegetables, carrots, beets, um, squash, stuff like this, which are your more high carb vegetables, that will satisfy me instead of like having pasta as part of the dish. Or maybe it's brown rice. I also hastily put together this little bowl. So here's my brown rice. I know it's difficult because a lot of people are like, what does brown rice look like though? Anyways, here's my brown rice. And then I thought like, oh, some other grains as well. Because one of the other things that helps satisfy our hunger is having some diversity in the diet, or having some not only different flavors and different sensations that help us feel like, "Ooh, yeah, this is fun, we're eating something different," but also the different nutritional makeup of the foods helps satisfy your body in different ways. So, bulgur, not vulgar, guys, bulgur, but it prepares just like rice. 1.5 cup grains to 1 cup water is the ratio, or 1 cup grains to 2 cups water. But this particular one has the ratio on the back. And we live in the day of the internet. So even if you've bought something from the bulk department and you're like, oh, shoot, just Google it, right? Um, there are now so many people that have posted different recipes or different, information about whatever. Somebody was mentioning me to the other day. I was talking about the gluten-free baking flours and how there's all these flours now. There's like kind of a blend of like coconut, tapioca, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, but I wonder what is the ratio to switch that out in my baking, not banking, excuse me. And I was like, "Oh my god, just Google it." There's no way so a lot of products will say on the package, right, exactly what the ratio or the switch out is, but if you can't find it on the package, check the internet. You'll be mind boggled at how many people wrote an extremely lengthy blog on how to prepare bulgur, or what ratio of, gluten-free flour to use in your cookie recipe, etc. Um And then last but not least, the tricolor quinoa, which looks like quinoa. Let's just call it for what it is, right? It looks like quinoa, but it's pronounced quinoa. And so I like this one, the tricolor quinoa. Mainly because like I think it looks cuter, but I'm sure that also it's got different nutritional components in the colored quinoa compared to the plain one. So there's a nutritional benefit as well. And this would just be one example of what I would consider healthy carbohydrates to include in your meals. And we can talk about the low carb thing if y'all want. Low carb and low fat, I think, are both complete farci. Anyways, eat the real foods. Eat the foods that contain fat, because your body will tell you, wow, I really enjoyed that food. It's because of the nutritional components of the food. Most of the research that was out there being done to demonize fats and try to encourage people to eat fat-free foods, a lot of that was funded by the sugar industry. because they were like, "Oh, all of these fat-free foods are gonna need so much sugar in them to make them palatable." And then when people are eating fat-free foods and they're never satisfied, how much are they gonna then overeat on all of our diet foods we've made from them? Similarly, low carb. Um, and I think that that one does have at least, low carb has a little bit of, uh, actual potential benefit to it, whereas low fat, I don't think has any. Um, but it's also been largely used to manipulate people and keep people struggling to lose weight more than um, really helping people, which is unfortunate. And I think if you're just perpetuating of major deprivation, that means your diet has an expiration date. There's going to be some point where the deprivation no longer is tolerable. And then not only do we gain all the weight back and we're back where we're started or maybe in an even worse place, but the effects on our body of the yo-yo dieting are also negative. Okay, Jules, what do you think about intuitive eating? Um, it's so funny. My freaking first first thing I went to do here was like Google intuitive eating. I'm like, I mean, does that just mean you listen to your hunger cues and eat when you're hungry and eat the foods you want to eat? Because that's basically like what I'm promoting, I guess you could say. Um, have a relationship with food where you love food and you appreciate food for the nourishment that it provides you. And you don't demonize foods and you don't demonize yourself for wanting certain foods. And, you know, aside from wanting, if there, there is one, I guess, exception. People who are like, well, I don't want to stop eating the Frankenfood processed junk foods, but I still want to lose weight. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do that, but I don't think it involves ever being like satisfied and happy. Is it bad to have sugar every day? I mean, my first answer would be it depends on what type of sugar. If we're talking about the high fructose corn syrup and corn syrup solids that are in these processed frankenfoods, then yeah, I would say any day that you're eating those things is bad. Um, but there's lots of real foods, natural foods that are super sweet. So maple syrup is a big one. This is actually my little coffee drink right here. And I use maple syrup in my coffee and I drink it every day. Sometimes I drink it more than once, especially if I'm going to do ASMR, which I was planning to do tonight, although now it's 8:13. I don't know what to do. Ah, but okay, so maple syrup. I eat maple syrup every day in my coffee. Um, there's also a lot of other nutrients in maple syrup, B vitamins, minerals in maple syrup. So, in addition to the sugar and the sweetness, your body actually is getting other nutrients that not only help your body digest the sugar and use it for energy, which is why the sugar's in the food in the first place, right? Because our body is like, yes, quick energy. But there's also those other nutrients in there. So that is one of the reasons why the natural sweetness is, I believe, not nearly as bad for you. Honey is another great example. Once again, lots of other nutrients that we get in addition to the sweetness. And we could talk about dates. There is stevia as an example. Um, but I'm just really a big proponent of Uh, my sugar, my uh, that I use is just like raw turbinado organic cane sugar. So it is sugar, right? But I wanted it sourced from organic sugar beets or sugar cane because the sugar beets and sugar cane, I don't remember if it's both, but definitely one of them is on that GMO crop list that we were talking about earlier, where it's like corn, I believe it's like corn, sugar beets. Anyways, different topic, right? GMOs is a different topic, but it's one of the many reasons why I always want to have organic sugar. If I'm, and I do have like a bag of sugar that I use in my recipes and stuff like that. But then maple syrup is the one that I have every day in my coffee, and I'm still kicking for whatever that's worth. Alrighty, Lewis Thompson, good to see you. Karina, I know we need to use actual healthy skin and makeup products, but most of those brands are expensive. So people buy the cheap makeup at Ulta or Walmart and it's not going to kill you. Are you over worrying? Lewis Thompson. I mean, I 100% believe that there's a happy balance between making healthy choices and making the best and healthiest choice that is available to us. Um, and finding the happy balance between not over worrying ourselves and overstressing ourselves. Each one of us every day is confronted with hundreds of decisions to make, right? It's a pretty tall order to say every single product in my home will be the healthiest, most expensive, organic, healthy, whatever. The multi-purpose cleaning spray, the body products, the stuff that sprays in the air to make it smell better. It goes on and on. The makeup, the nail polish, you could really go on and on. The clothes you wear. So for me as a holistic health coach, I don't pay to go get my nails done. I don't get I don't get my hair done. I don't spend I feel like a lot of people spend a lot of money on doing those things, and that's great if they want to do that. But I'm just saying, for me, I don't do those things. I don't really spend a lot of money on stuff like that. But what I do spend my money on, though, I like wearing organic clothes. I feel like it makes my freaking pits not smell as bad. When I wear polyester, when I wear and when you start looking at the tags on the clothes, it's all made out of this polyester and rayon and nylon and all these but those things make me smell really bad. Okay. Now I started wearing this brand, Packed Organic. I do have a link for it in my videos and stuff. I'm a affiliate for them because I freaking love this brand. For me, it started with the underwear because I was like, man, what's in this material that they make these underwear out of? And anyways, I started going down that rabbit hole and I started switching over to organic underwear several years ago. Well, now within the last year or maybe 2 years, I don't know the timing exactly. Well, now they came out and they said, "Oh, they're finding a lot of PFAs, perfluorochloridated something," or I can't remember what the things, but the PFAs, those are the forever chemicals. And they found them in the crotch of the leggings, finding them in the underwear, finding them in the feminine care underwear. Those forever chemicals they're called forever chemicals because they never dissipate in the environment. They never go away. And if they're in your body doesn't ever get rid of them. They are just getting sequestered somewhere. Well, at that point, I was like, wow, I'm really glad I started wearing freaking organic underwear years ago. Jeez. And, now I've kind of slowly, transferred a lot of my wardrobe and my leggings. And certainly when I'm working out and sweating, I'm like, don't want to be wearing forever chemical leggings. That's freaking creepy. For the stuff I put on my face, I I mean, I don't let's see. And of course I didn't bring I don't have my makeup over here anyways. Anyways, I use this brand called 100% Pure. It's excuse me. A lot of it is organic, cruelty free, right? Which is a big thing when you start realizing how horrible a lot of these cosmetic companies treat animals just to test their products. Like, that's horrifying. Okay. But the ingredients themselves are also more natural, and the things are plant-based, the colors are plant-based pigments, etc. I feel like that's an important thing for me. And when it comes to the price of a lot of them, honestly, when I'm looking at, other makeup ads that come up and people talk like it's expensive. And it's honestly way more expensive than my 100% pure, like, organic I don't think it's all organic, but natural makeup with a lot of organic ingredients in it. Um, so it's this weird thing where, like, obviously, there's a lot of cheaper makeup, and we'd hear about, like, the drugstore makeup, and people do entire makeup looks with drugstore makeup. And I've bought my fair share of drugstore makeup over the years as well. Um, but it's a difficult, it's really a difficult decision, but it is a personal decision for everyone. And I, yeah, I probably could certainly be accused of over worrying, but I also feel like all of the things that I've been excuse me, all the things that I've been that I have found suspicious, I ended up being right. Okay, so when I was a college in college, I wrote my senior thesis paper. It was called "The Physiological Effects of Processed Foods and Implications in Health and Disease." And one of the things I talked about in that paper was the partially hydrogenated fats or trans fats. And how I thought like, "Oh, these things, like, really don't seem like they're good for people, like, blah, blah, blah," and so I, like, wrote about that in my paper. Well, then several years later, there ends up being a study about how the trans fats are the absolute unhealthiest fats for you, far worse for your body than the saturated or unsaturated fats that they were made to replace. The PFAs in the underwear and the yoga legging materials. I was like but, it made me go like, "Wow, thank God I stopped wearing those things." And lordy, I don't know if I answered your question. In the grand scheme of things, it would be impossible for us to make every single change, do every single thing. So we just have to pick the things that mean the most to us and the things that are within our reach to change, right? And at the point that you're overwhelmed and over worrying and overwhelmed by feeling like you can't make that choice or you can't afford to make that other option, or you just don't have accessible to you the option that you want, that worry and that stress that you're feeling, it's bad for you too. So it's like, make the healthy choices when you can and release the feeling of overwhelm or worry about the things that you can't change or the things that you can't afford to change right now. If you focus on just doing what you can and doing the things that are most important to you, I think that's like maybe sort of the recipe for happiness, or at least like helps you set on the right path. Um and not passing judgment on other people if they don't feel the same as we do about something, right? That would be, I would say, another important part. There's a lot of people within the health and wellness uh, world now, which is, I was going to say community, but it's like bigger than a community, right? There's a lot of people who are so passionate about their thing or whatever, their soapbox, you could say, that they end up causing more stress and overwhelm for people, where I'm like, let's just focus on helping each other. Let's Let's focus on lifting each other up, helping one another find the things that they can change, the things that mean something to them to the change, that give them some sense of, satisfaction or feeling like they've made a healthier choice. Um, and then, yeah, if you're one of these people who's like, honestly, I could give an F if I'm putting petroleum products all over my skin. I really don't care. If I'm exposing myself to forever chemicals, I really don't care. If I'm exposing myself to microplastics in every single meal that I consume all day, like, I don't really care if you don't care. I would be like, I hope that you don't end up, having bad reactions to one of those things and making you feel crummy. But realistically, I'm not gonna like get on someone's butt about not caring. Like, you do you, boo. If you don't care and you don't want to worry, that's okay with me. But for people who are concerned, and certainly a lot of people, the point that they start getting concerned is like they're having some kind of problem, having some kind of symptom or some kind of issue or pain. And then that's the impetus for them to be like, okay, I'm going to try to make some of these changes. If you're not there yet, like, consider yourself lucky that you're not there yet. I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but I feel that I've completed my answer. Lauren, what if you have a spoonful of raw honey and then apples? For example, is that too much sugar? So apples have so much fiber, and so many nutrients. I mean, there's a reason they're like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And like, there's tons of nutrients in an apple. Um, so eating an apple is healthier for you than drinking apple juice. Because when you drink the juice, you're not getting all the fiber and other good nutrients that are in the regular apple in its normal apple state. Um, Now, a spoonful of honey with it, I feel like a spoonful of honey is not bad for people. And if you're like, ooh, and like one of my favorite things is apple. If I'm feeling really like fancy or whatever, like channeling my inner Kardashian or whatever, like I'll slice the apple up and then like spread on some almond butter and drizzle with honey. But sometimes I'll just like freaking make the freaking thing as I go, right? But that's one of my favorite snacks, peanut butter or almond butter and honey on an apple. And like, I think I consider that a healthy snack. If you're eating an apple, that's healthy. And then if you got to do a little something extra to the apple to make it a little better, and now some apples are a little bit bitter and they really do need that extra honey, you know? Or I think it's that brand Justin's, and they make this little like squeezy packet of like chocolate almond butter. Some apples need a packet of chocolate almond butter on them to help them go down better. But I, in general, would say that whatever it takes to get you to eat a piece of fruit or a vegetable for that matter, it's still healthy and go for it. And if you're eating honey instead of artificial sweeteners or high fructose corn syrup, then it totally gets my seal of approval. Lauren, yes, you are 100% right. Isn't a lot of drugstore makeup made by the same high-end manufacturers? Yes. And I feel like it's L'Oreal that owns like hundreds of different makeup brands. I've definitely seen a bunch of people's like TikToks on stuff like that. And they'll show like the Yves Saint Laurent. And then they're like, oh yeah, actually it's the exact same as the whatever is the cheaper one. And yeah, so then you have this situation where not only are they putting like weird toxic stuff in the makeup, which, maybe they have to do that. But then they also are, like, marking up the same product for people just to, like, pay for the fancy name. Like, it just rubs me the wrong way, man. Rubs me the wrong way. Darren Silverman. Hi, Karina. My father recently passed. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My condolences for you, Darren. I've been struggling with getting myself to eat anything. Do you have any tips on eating healthy when you are depressed? Honestly, do not worry about eating healthy. So my mom passed last year, 2 years ago technically, now that it's 2024, but like by 3 days. So it was August of 2022 that I lost my mom. I didn't start considering trying to eat healthy for, I don't know, 6 months or a year. And honestly, I still don't really like I'm not like, "Oh, I'm trying to eat healthy." I, um, I would just encourage you to focus on nourishing yourself. And if it's comfort foods, if it's junk foods even, like just whatever you can stomach. I think that grief is a time that, all this other crud goes on the back burner. Trying to eat healthy, trying to lose weight, trying to do whatever, like all that, no, F it. Focusing on letting your heart heal and just nourishing yourself and comforting yourself, I think is most important. Um, but yeah, my my grief approach was just like I did not worry at all about trying to like eat healthy. I do recognize that I feel so much better when I eat some vegetables versus when I have a meal with no vegetables in it. So I do always try to have some like vegetables at every meal, either a salad, and then for anybody who missed it, I like getting trail mix, a bag of trail mix, and like adding that on my salad. So you have like some nuts, maybe there's like dried fruit or something, little pepita seeds, right? Like putting yummy stuff in the salad. If you like garbanzo beans or really any kind of beans is a great thing to like add to a salad, right? And easy. Um, or I'll just make a broccoli bake where I just kind of put a bunch of broccoli or green beans or carrots or really any other veggie, right? With a bunch of, you know, avocado oil, or you can just use butter. Like we need to all just start like cooking with butter, I think is certainly better than a lot of the like vegetable oils, right? That we are like inundated with and they're super cheap. Unfortunately, they're terrible for us. But anyways, your oil of choice, avocado oil, butter, coconut oil, those would be my recommendations. And then I'll usually put sprinkle a bunch of cheese on top as well. And a little Italian spice blend or something. So like eating the thing you want, a steak or a burger or a hot dog. If you want a hot dog, like I recommend getting the organic ones at least, but eat the thing you want and then just try to add something to it that's also got some nutrients in there. Because vegetables do help your digestive tract function better. So that would be my only stipulation is like eat what you want, nourish yourself. Don't worry about depriving yourself or trying to make healthy choices, especially if you're having trouble eating. Eat what you want and then just try to add some healthy things into your diet when you can. And my love and condolences to you that you feel better, that you feel better. Little Nick, good to see you. Little Nick has a really good response here. He says, "I went that through that myself, Darren. Tried eating less but more often with more salads and fruits and less processed and cooked food worked for me. Oh, less produced and cooked food worked for me." So yeah, I love that too. So getting like a bag of apples, a bag of oranges, and some bananas, and just like having something like that, fruits around, salads around. And there's so many like salad kits now available. Um, it is worth mentioning that, anytime somebody has, like, cut through the fruits or the vegetables or whatever, and then they're in a bag, or the little pre-cut fruits section or pre-chopped cilantro, those things can have bad things that end up growing in them. So your healthiest option will be making the thing yourself or buying the whole fruit and chopping it yourself rather than getting the one that's already chopped. I also understand that just for convenience, though, the ones that are like a salad bag or whatever, like that's easy, get that. But just as a side note, especially for people with really sensitive digestive systems, um, you just want to be aware of that. And when you can, buy the whole normal food and then chop it up yourself. Okay, Jules, what happens in your body when you eat a few huge meals over the holidays? Is it possible to gain weight from 1 or 2 days of eating a lot, especially sugar? The main thing that we notice is retaining water. And a lot of times the body will retain a lot more water after the holidays because it's trying to dilute all of the, other stuff that we've ingested. Or that's kind of a oversimplification of it, but it's part of the reason why we retain a lot more water. The body's process to make new fat cells or to burn fat cells for that matter, um, is not something that you're gonna notice that quickly, I think. Now, obviously, there's, I believe, probably exceptions for that, and certainly when people do really extreme types of, diets and workouts, like, they may actually see their weight changing drastically very quickly. But in general, when we're looking in the mirror and we're feeling like, "Oh, I gained so much weight over the holidays," it's just our body holding on to a lot more water rather than our body, like, storing all of that fat and sugar that quickly. Um, so after the holidays and a lot of overeating, that's a super common one, right? We're all in that position. Um, it can sometimes, we kind of feel a little depleted. We kind of feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But then realistically, it's like everyone does that. So forgive yourself for being perfectly human. And again, like I keep coming back to this idea of like nourishing our bodies rather than depriving them. When we nourish our bodies with comfort foods and yummy foods around the holidays, like that in and of itself is um, kind of part of nourishing ourselves, even if sometimes it's not with always the healthiest foods. So when we're nourishing ourselves emotionally, and part of that comes through enjoying these large food meals together and enjoying all of the foods that our family has made and brought to the table, enjoy that and don't demonize that. There's a lot of people out there who don't have that experience. So just to have that experience at all, you should really be grateful for that. And I would maybe come back to what I started out saying at the beginning of this chat about recognizing where our self judgment starts coming in and sabotaging us. So if we have a thought like, "Oh god, I overate so bad at the holidays, what's the point?" Well, that self-judgment just sabotaged you. So rather than feeling bad about what you've done in the past, I encourage you to just look forward and maybe start thinking about like, okay, what things can I do to set myself up for success? So having healthy food in the fridge is a big one. Making more food at home is probably the best thing anyone can do for their health because anytime we're eating out in restaurants, whether it's a regular restaurant or fast food restaurant, that's a really hard place to actually get healthy food. So, setting yourself up to maybe have one night a week that you're making a nourishing meal at home. Look forward at the changes you can make. Try not to feel judgment about things that you did in the past. Realistically, overeating for a few days is not going to drastically change your actual weight. Unless you stand on one of those smart scale things that actually shows you like what is your water weight, what is your actual like all those things like looking at a scale is very deceptive. It doesn't tell us how much of our weight is just water retention. Um, so I think the scale causes a lot more stress and distress than it does to help people. Um, Little Nick, be gentle with yourself, treat yourself like a child, basically, and ask, what do you feel like eating? Lewis Thompson, can you do a 2024 version of the Photoshop effect and add social media, not care about how many followers like you get, especially if you post a lot, but don't get much love back on social media? Oh, the Photoshop effect, but with your social media vanity metrics. Um, yeah, social media platforms, you know, are a weird place. And it is definitely sometimes bizarre to see what is promoted and pushed out and gets crazy, hugely popular versus things that we feel like, oh, this actually has some value, but why does no one care? Well, largely it's not that people don't care, it's just that they don't see it. They don't know that it exists at all. So, especially for people who maybe feel like they're putting posts out, putting things out, and then they're just kind of being lost into the ether, um, know that that's nothing personal to you. That's just how social media works. And at some point, the algorithm figures out how to push the content you're making to the people who will find it interesting. Um, and we have different ways of helping the algorithm do that. I think they are kind of saying that hashtags are no longer the way of the world and this search engine optimization, blah, blah, blah. Um, Making your content very clear as to who it's for, what problem it's there to solve. Try to help the algorithm understand who it should show your content to. And that's a weird like thing to say. But hopefully you can kind of think about how to like translate that to whatever it is you're making. And just don't take it personally if the platforms aren't showing your content to people. And know that if you're not getting lots of engagement and interaction on the content, it's largely because it's just not being shown to people. Stay consistent, keep pushing forward, keep creating, keep putting stuff out there. Eventually, the algorithm will figure out who to show it to. Um, but yeah, can be very discouraging. It can be very discouraging. And pushing through that discouragement level is part of the challenge. Um, I don't know if that answers your question, Lewis. Let me know if that is what you were getting at with that question. Um, and then let's see. Okay, so now it's almost 9. My whole goal was to try to do this chat earlier so that I could then start my YouTube chat at its regular time. And then, of course, that just did not end up working out as I had hoped. Um, But yeah, so I'm thinking I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this chat, and then I will come on and start my ASMR chat at 9. It'll be a little bit later than usual, but I know most of y'all are in here already. But I still feel like, oh, because I hadn't posted anything on the ASMR channel yet, um, there might be people who are like sitting there like, is she gonna do ASMR? And then I also am like, I don't know if I should do a live when I posted a video today. Like, I hope I don't like make my video do bad because of the live. I don't see how that could happen. But also, that sounds like something YouTube would do. So let's see. Little Nick. I know. You know what's funny is I was a freaking little Instagram maniac. God, sorry. I need to get an actual light stand for this like situation because I'm using a microphone stand with an extra thing on it to like try to put my light on. And normally it works and it's great, but like now the stand just falls over the course of the live. Anyway, okay, there we go. A solution was found. Um But yeah, so little Nick, you have a bunch of followers on Instagram and you don't use it at all to promote your channels and videos recently. Should announce the live and videos. Yeah, I feel a lot of conflict about the Instagram because when I've posted ASMR content on there, it doesn't do great. I think most of the people who followed me on Instagram, because I don't know. So I don't know. So I have this weird thing like my identity or whatever. So I was thinking like TikTok is my ASMR identity. And then my Instagram will be like my health coach identity. And of course, today I was just scrambling so much just to get this thing started. I was like, oh, I could spend an extra 10 minutes trying to post something on Instagram about it, or I could just, but you're right. In hindsight, I should have posted on the Instagram. Um, but yeah, juggling all of the different platforms is also very funny. But yeah, and then it's also interesting too cuz now my TikTok has surpassed my Instagram. Um I might even I'm almost at 10K. Let's see how close I am. 9715. That's exciting. So yeah, so it's weird. Like it took me years to grow up to like 6,000 on Instagram, and now I've hit almost 10,000 on TikTok in like a matter of months. So go figure. Um but yes, getting more consistent on all the platforms is part of my New Year's goals that I have set for myself. Y'all, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night here, but thank you for hanging out with me. I hope that this chat has given you some encouragement, some motivation, somewhere within all of that mindless rambling. Hopefully, I gave you some particle of goodness to help you go into the new year strong and mostly with confidence and self love. That is my main message to everyone. I appreciate y'all for being here and look forward to seeing you soon. Feel free, if you are watching this chat in the future, to leave your health questions down below in the comments, and I will be answering them in my next Ask a Health Coach live. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all very, very soon.